The Alien Abduction Files, brought to you by the authors Kathleen Marden and Denise Stoner.
Hello, I'm Kathleen Marden. You might know me as the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. They were the first UFO abduction experiencers whose abduction stirred worldwide attention. Their abduction occurred in 1961, and I researched it for many, many years. I investigated it, and my Aunt Betty agreed to work with me. Over many, many years, she turned over her original investigative files to me, letters to and from scientists, and the hypnosis tapes that I used for comparative analysis in the first book that I wrote, which was captured, The Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. And Stanton T. Friedman assisted me with this book and wrote 2 chapters in it. I certainly appreciated all of the work that he did on this, and it resulted in our writing a second book, Science Was Wrong, and each of us wrote 7 chapters in that book. I am a full-time UFO researcher and abduction investigator and researcher. I am also the Mutual UFO Network's Director of Abduction Research, and I am an author and a lecturer. My professional background is as a social worker and as an educator and education services coordinator. I take a scientific approach to my work, and I'm very proud of what I do. I am as meticulous and unbiased as I can possibly be in any investigation that I conduct. And that is about all I can say about myself.
Hi, I'm Denise Stoner, and I have worked for 20 years plus investigating UFOs, and at one point I decided I would like to work with abductees, or those who claim to have had experiences with being captured by aliens and taken onto crafts. I've worked with the federal government for over 20 years, and I am now retired. I began working with the National Park Service and worked on a project with Saudi Arabia to build their first national park. And then from there I worked for the military and in a special research laboratory that had simulation labs working on all different kinds of projects. Once I retired, I began full-time holding all kinds of support groups for those who claim to be abductees, and I also go out in the field investigating UFO sightings. And then I met Kathleen Marden, and the 2 of us together have been working on serious scientific research projects involving abductees and trying to discover what is the purpose behind these abductions. And then together we have worked on a book for over 2 years, and the contents of those books are going to be discussed on Coast to Coast. And we're going to talk about that on this tape very briefly.
We'd like to introduce to you our new book, The Alien Abduction Files, the world's most startling cases of human-alien contact ever reported. Denise and I met approximately 3.5 years ago when I moved from my home in New Hampshire to Florida. And I knew of Denise's important work as a MUFON member, as the state's chief investigator at that time, and I knew that she was conducting meetings, some public interest meetings for MUFON as the state section director, and also special meetings, private meetings for abductees. And I wanted to attend her meetings. She permitted me to do so, and we started to speak with each other. She invited me to her home. Over time, Denise revealed to me confidentially that she was an abduction experiencer and that she had had 2 very important missing time events. One in Colorado in 1982 and another in Florida in 1991. There were witnesses, and she was accompanied by her husband during both of these significant missing time events. She had seen a hypnotist when she lived in Colorado, but he had passed away and her files had been lost. She couldn't remember a lot about what she said, and I then offered to use my skills to facilitate her memory, and we started to work together. As time went on, we worked together on other projects as well. A major research project, for example, that we conducted over a 1-year period with 50 experiencers and a 25-person control group of sorts. Denise and I eventually came together to work on this very important book, and we're very proud now to introduce it to you and to discuss it on Coast to Coast.
We'd like to talk a little bit about how we met, and Kathleen has already mentioned that when she moved to Florida that she contacted me and I invited her for lunch. We found out we had quite a few things in common. We had both had sightings, and we both lived in the same area in Colorado for a while and didn't know it. And I mentioned the fact that I had had some experiences and didn't recall some of them, and beginning to work together, we found out that I had had an experience that was quite unusual, and Kathleen began to research that. And that's very, very important, because what we brought forward and what's written about in the book is what happens when suddenly you find yourself in your vehicle and your husband and your daughter lifted off the road in a place in the high desert in Colorado, and you find that car moving across the high desert. It's daylight, the sun is shining, and once you move across that desert and you find the car landing, coming to a landing, and suddenly there are 3 hours of missing time, and you're on a pass in the mountains on the other side of that high desert. People are waiting for you, and it's now dark. It's totally dark, and your odometer in your car that had been set has not moved. And you need to figure out where you've been, what has happened. You have images in your mind that are not right. You're very frightened, very fearful and disoriented, and so is your husband. And you move on to meet your party on the other side, and they're wondering where you've been. They're about to send out a search party, and you just don't have any recall of what happened, other than these slight flashes of memory that have peculiar faces and giant eyes, and possibly some physical phenomenon that occurred that were not pleasant.
The reason that I wanted to investigate the Stoners' missing time event is because they had conscious, continuous recall of a close encounter with a UFO. Denise remembered the car sliding off the road, and then, as if only a moment had passed, she and Ed found themselves in a new location 40 miles down the road. It didn't register on their odometer, and nearly 4 hours had passed.
Please listen to this complete discussion on Coast to Coast.